I don't know where the lung cancer came from. Yeah, this is morphine, which I took for the really disgusting stomach cramps. After 3 hours, absolutely no effect.
Is there such a thing as a good death?
A good death?
And why you ask about die, not about living, enjoying, entertainment, only die?
Our experience with death is what we see on TV and in the movies.
We have a problem in American culture.
People mostly dying in hospitals, often in pain, too often alone.
We don't have a universal understanding of how we should grieve. We're just embarrassed because we don't know what to do.
This is an important topic for an anthropologist to look at because I could take multiple points of view and look at why this cultural conversation of complaint had been going on for 20 years unabated.
When you start talking about death and being afraid, people think that you're a little loosey upstairs, and it's like, well, why are you thinking about that? Or is she suicidal? Or is she depressed? I don't always talk about it, no.
Had you asked this question maybe 20 years ago, I think most people would have defined a good death the way Woody Allen did. I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens.
A really dear 51-year-old guy who was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He isn't swallowing. He's lost 7 pounds in the last 3 weeks. He's getting chemotherapy. To me, he's dying. He really looks like he's dying. But he described his experience with this cancer and how really, quote unquote, it opened up his heart to the kind of love that's in the world, and how that was really, it was just really emotional.
The hospice model really began as a countercultural movement that really started in response to bad dying that was happening in this country.
We keep hearing about the good death, the good grief. We're told how to behave. We're told what we ought to do. Usually we're told things that seem to me to be, to tend to want to quiet us down.
This is when Ed and I first met. It was one of our first pictures together. These are my favorite sweaters that reminded me of him, and I just kept them, you know.
We attach to each other, we love each other, and that goodbye is excruciating.
They bury cremains so that there's no markers to look for. But if you want to come back years later and find your loved one, they'll give you a GPS locator with the coordinates.
So the first time I went to a mortuary, I asked him, what does someone who's dead need to be protected from? He leaned across his desk and he said, alien and foreign objects reaching the body of your loved one.
They had her casket, this pine box, and she had stenciled it, and it was divinely beautiful. She and her husband grew this large squash. After the service was over, the kids were using the long squash like a bat. You know, it was just a natural thing for kids to do. Now, if they had been in a funeral home, that never would have been allowed.
It's certainly been a major issue in Oregon, and it's something that I believe we voted on in favor of twice as a state, and it's something that I definitely support. I think people need to have control over how they end their life.
For a while I was kind of like, oh, my grandpa's committing suicide, but that word, that's when it happened, that word just, that's not the word. You know, it just went away. And
my feeling was, after he passed away, I felt like he was more in the room than before. I felt his spirit envelop us so much more than when he'd just been in that shell of a body.
Terri Schiavo's case became a national passion story. Here she was under sentence of death, and they were going to save her, and they were going to extend her life as they understood her life, not as she understood her life.
We may come to the point where there'll be a duty to die because, you know, your grandma, you're costing us too much money.
We have so many more things at our disposal now than we had in 1969. And also, I suppose, so many more potentially false hopes.
They made me sign Do Not Resuscitate, and I'd like to revise that to Do Not Resuscitate only upon a severe emergency.
This, you could say, is the postmodern dilemma of our time. We don't want a great deal of technology. We don't want too much, yet we want enough.
We're looking at this idea of like a good death.
A good death? I'm not really sure. I mean...
What is a good death? I am personally very skeptical because the fact is that death is hard to bear.
Finally, I come to the fact that, yeah, in the summer of '07, I should be gone. So when that summer passed on, I was almost disappointed that I hadn't died.
The most effective way to change American culture is to seed our collective imagination with stories of positive experiences.
I should have been dead a year ago. Why am I still here?